It was nominated for 2 Independent Spirit Awards, including the John Cassavetes Award for Best Low Budget Narrative, and received national theatrical release. Sections of Kyle's follow-up feature, Foreplay, also screened at Sundance and Cannes. Very impressive. His latest feature, Rogers Park, about 2 interracial couples going through a midlife crisis, was a New York Times and Los Angeles Times critics pick and is rated 100% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. Kyle is also the editor of the Sundance Award-winning film Manito and 9 feature documentaries, including PBS's Before You Know It, Emmy Award winner Where Soldiers Come From, and Showtime's Trinidad. Kyle received his MFA in film production from University of Texas in Austin and a BA in art history and an BFA in filmmaking from Rice University. He currently is an associate professor of film production at Northwestern University. And fun fact, Kyle grew up in Houston and he and I actually went to high school together. So I'll now turn things over to my fellow Clear Creek Wildcat, Kyle Henry. Take it away, Kyle.
Thank you, Michelle. That bio was embarrassingly long, and apologies in advance if the bios that I give for our panelists tonight are more in the lines of, yes, short, so we have as much time as possible to speak. I'm going to ask that each panelist, as I introduce them, answer a question. And some of our panelists have to leave early, so we'll be going in a particular order tonight. So do know if you do have to leave at a certain time, feel free to wave goodbye and sign off. But let's begin with history. And I'd like to introduce David Welling, who's the author of Cinema Houston, who's a historian. And David, I'd love you to talk a little bit about the history of the River Oaks Theater and in general, the importance of preserving historical venues like the River Oaks Theater in Houston.
Well, I think part of it, as far as the preservation in Houston, especially more than other cities, we've lost a lot of our important structures just over the period of time. And so all of our really old historic theaters are long gone. The River Oaks really represents our oldest operational theater. And of course, as of this last month, it's ceased operations. But it was built in 1939. It was actually one of 4 theaters that opened that year, all of which in the month of November, ironically. And of those 4, 2 of them are now gone. The other one is the Alabama Theater, which is now Trader Joe's. And it managed to survive for over 80 years. It really hit its magic moment in the 70s when it went from being an independent theater to an interstate theater, and then finally it came under the umbrella of Landmark. And at the time, this is pre-video, pre-cable, pre-ability to watch movies when you wanted to at any time. They turned into a repertory house, and movies would change every 2 days. You'd have double bills, and many of us got our education in movies there. That's where I spent much of my college years, in there watching movies. And it was magic.
Thank you for talking about your personal connection. Maybe if all of us could speak about our personal connection too. So the next panelist who needs no introduction, but I will introduce him, is director Richard Linklater, prolific filmmaker, director, producer, screenwriter. So my favorites, Boyhood, Last Flag Flying, Scanner Darkly, just naming a few. Would love to know your history with the River Oaks Theater and why you think places like this are important to maintain.
Yeah, I'll pick up where David was leaving off, right there when it was a repertory cinema, right when summer of '81. That's when I'd been at college, came back to Houston, had a job working offshore, and I was getting into film, and that was it. That was my film school. That was the church I had wandered into and found the Holy Spirit, I mean, it was of cinema. I was there watching every single one of those double features. And yeah, no, it was incredible. I'd get that schedule out and mark all the films. I'd go home and read the history of every, writer, director, actor. And I just did that for a couple of years, just solid. And it was a good time in Houston too. The long gone Greenway Plaza, I was, going to that regularly. And then of course the Rice Media Center and the museum, they're still doing it. But yeah, the River Oaks is a very special place to me. And I know so many other, just everyone who loves Houston film and has that sense of community. It's just unfathomable that it could be closing. I know economic pressures and all that, but it's really unacceptable. Like a city as big as Houston, it's just a big moment. We all have to do what we can to have that not happen. Houston has its challenges. We all love Houston, but that no zoning thing where you can demolish a historic building, other towns have struggled through, and they end up with that old theater because it became not economically viable, but they couldn't tear it down. Someone else bought it, and then they went out of business, and then someone else bought it. And then finally a nonprofit came aboard and made it a nonprofit arts center of some kind. But the structure's there. It needs to endure, and we'll figure out the economics of it. But the main thing is save the building itself, because that's the cultural history. And if you can tear down everything, like you said, we've already lost so much of the history. But if it's just economics, there's always going to be something worth more money that you can do with that space. You just have to see cinema, and it's taken a while. And like everyone knows, other art forms need help. They're more along the lines of education, So my relation to the River Oaks, it's where without leaving Houston, I really got to know the world. That's where I saw the world. Roger Ebert, the late great critic, he said cinema was the great empathy generator. And it's true. It's a very powerful medium. We get to know each other. We're less afraid of each other. No one can convince me like Iran as a country is evil, because I know their national cinema. I know the soul of their artists. I don't buy it. You can't make me afraid of people that I've never been around, because I have been around them. I know their movies. So I just think it's just such an important cultural medium. And Houston's, as the fourth largest city in the country, there's no excuse that this cultural center, because River Oaks is a cultural center with other venues. It's what makes a film culture, and it's important on culturally, but educationally. If you're a college age student coming of age, you got to have that experience. You got to be able to walk into that theater, see a movie on a big screen, and have that cinematic experience. And we all have a longing for community. So movie theaters, all these things. So it's just so important. And that's why I'm here, not only for cinema, but in particular, the River Oaks. It's just, it can't go away. We have to do whatever it takes. I know where there's a will, there's a way. So I'm hopeful, but I can't state enough. When people ask me, what's the cinema of your life? I've written about it in journals, film publications over and over. I always talk about the River Oaks as the place where I felt I encountered cinema, so.
That's wonderful. Like as site of community, I think these spaces are places of community and physical places of community, which, sorry, Zoom, this isn't it in terms of physical space. Bunby, internationally renowned recording artist, now distinguished lecturer at Rice University, also a board member of the Houston Cinema Arts Society. Maybe building off of that, to these spaces, if you could talk about your personal connection to the River Oaks Theater, but also these spaces as being sites of community, and maybe ideas for ways that spaces, the River Oaks Theater has always been located, from my history with the River Oaks Theater, was a place I went to, League City, Texas, has always been in a fairly, let's just say this not particularly inclusive neighborhood.
Right.
So how do these places, which are vital for cinema culture, become spaces that many communities can take advantage of, because I think that's one of the keys of sustaining a place like the River Oaks.
First of all, thank you guys for having me today. I'm so honored to be here as a part of this panel. For me personally, I mean, I have a very good friend, a longtime friend. We grew up together in the same city, went to the same high school, and he originally wanted to be a football player, hurt his knee at the U of A, at the University of Houston, and decided to go into film making. I'm not sure why. There was no frame of reference for him coming from where we come from to make a movie, but he was just like, I can't play football, but I love movies, I love film. Let's go there, right? And so he became one of the go-to music video directors in this area, did very good for himself, and then eventually was able to create a feature film. And so once he created the film, and I'm cameoing in it, just, little disclaimer there, I'm also in the film. But he was trying to find somewhere to premiere the film. And no one was really giving him the opportunity to present his film to the masses. And the only theater that, embraced him as an independent filmmaker here in Houston and gave him a platform to present his movie to the masses was River Oaks Theater. And as we went to the premiere, a lot of the other local video directors were there. Everyone very excited about the fact that this guy had gotten a feature film, very excited about the potentiality of them one day being in that cinema, presenting their film, different recording artists coming around like, hey man, this is cool. Somebody that supported us as up and coming musicians, now we get to support him as an up and coming filmmaker. And so within that moment of him having that premiere, it came all of these different creative ideas flowing and creative juices flowing from different individuals. So it served two purposes, right? It served as an outlet for him to present his film to the community, but also allowed individuals from the community to come together and not only talk about that film, but film in general. It allowed young filmmakers and young creators to fantasize about themselves being able to present something in this theater. So I believe it's multifaceted, the need for a place like River Oaks Theater. I'll also tell another story. So people that know me know that I'm a cinephile, right? And I like the blockbusters, I'm all in for the Marvel movies and everything like that, but I also do like independent films. I like, young filmmakers just throwing it up against the wall and seeing what sticks. And one of the few places that you could count on consistently presenting films like that was River Oaks. So when I was dating the woman who eventually became my wife, I was like, look, at some point you're gonna have to let her know that you like movies and you like all movies, right? You like, major mainstream movies. You also like independent films. You like international films. You like documentaries. And so I asked her to come on a date with me to the movies, and the movie was Life is Beautiful. And I was like, well, look, this movie's gonna have subtitles, so you're gonna have to read the screen. And she looked at me like, subtitles? I don't want to have to read the whole movie. But she went for it and went in and sat down, and she became engaged as she should have been. She laughed when she was supposed to laugh. She cried when she was supposed to cry. And in that moment, for one, just the fact that she was willing to embrace a part of my life, that was amazing. But two, the fact that I was able to share this amazing moment with her watching this incredible film. We were able to watch the Oscars later. And when he won at the Oscars, she was so happy because she was like, I think this guy's going to win. It was an amazing film. And so we have that shared moment. And so many people have these moments, right, in their lives that can't be replaced. There's no other place for me to go and have these kind of experiences. There's no other theaters locally that are going to allow a young independent filmmaker to come in and present his film to the community. So we're not just losing a movie house, a movie theater. We're using one of those places where artists can come and present themselves to the world, but then also young creators can come and ponder what their future might be, and see themselves in the filmmakers and the films that they watch and create and become inspired, and they can become the next Rick Linklater.
Wonderful. I know these places are also places where people find collaborators for future projects. Cinephiles are attracted to each other in these spaces, and suddenly
Absolutely.
They're making movies with each other. Bob Berney, president of Picturehouse, Los Angeles-based independent film marketing and distribution company, legend and legendary. I'd love for you to talk just a little bit about the state of theatrical distribution. Landmark, the River Oaks is part of the Landmark chain. Things have been in crisis for a while in terms of theatrical distribution. But what does it mean for something like Landmark and this iconic theater, and in the fourth largest city in the United States, to sort of pull out what potentially could happen post this move?
Yeah, it's a crazy time, and just so you know, my connection physically with Houston was I'm after college I managed and programmed the Greenway Theater, which was the competition of the River Oaks, but the River Oaks was the holy grail. We were a sub-basement kind of dump theater, but the River Oaks was this amazing thing and I think that's important to remember that it's a combination of what you see in the theater and the theater in these type of theaters. It's the architecture as well as what you see. So it's the memories of the movies you saw, but where you saw them, and I connect everything to that. And as Bon and Rick, everybody has talked about community. Theaters like the River Oaks, having film festivals, events, directors presenting movies, it becomes a community center. It's much more than a typical just movie theater. It really becomes a center of the whole community with education and fun and everything. And as I ran a theater, another interstate theater in Dallas called the Inwood, kind of the same progression. And luckily it's part of Landmark too, and it's still there. But it is a tough time because when the COVID hit, essentially accelerated all the changes that were kind of coming in terms of the windows, meaning how long a film can play in a theater before it goes to other things. Netflix, Amazon, which I ran Amazon when they first started in the film business. It's really changed and put a squeeze on movie theaters, and the pandemic really did a number. And I think it's going to be the hardest for kind of independent cinemas and art house venues to come back. It's one thing, like this weekend, everybody's hoping that Godzilla is going to return people to theaters, but it is going to be a challenge. And I do think that Rick was right in saying it's the building has to be preserved. There's ways to do it. Either some arrangement can be worked out with Landmark, maybe another operator, maybe a kind of nonprofit can come in. There's several ones that are successful examples of that, like Rick's and the Jacob Burns in New York, and there's several. So, but it is really important that something doesn't happen, that the actual physical building is lost, because I think for a city, it is that it's a community center, and it's really important. It's more than just a mall movie theater. But I do think that theatrical will come back strongly. I think that there's a pent-up desire, and I'm all for, my friends at the streamers, they're enabling a lot of movies to be made. I do think that even the streamers like Netflix took over the Egyptian here in Los Angeles, and they took over the Paris in New York. So if you look at, I think even the award season this year, without theater presentation, there's really a lack of awareness of the culture and the leaders and what's going on in cinema. So I think it's really a challenging time, particularly for smaller theater operators and chains like Landmark, trying to negotiate rental rates and everything after this close down. And there has to be a give and take. And I don't know the specifics of this negotiation, but I'm just hoping that the landlord will realize what a jewel they have, and it's not just a space. It's much more than that.
Thank you. That makes me think too of the idea of creative ideas, that any of us have. The model of the Austin Film Society running and purchasing a theater that had been abandoned, for a while. That's one model. pairing with a university. I know there's the Deluxe Theater now in Houston, which for a while I think was partnered with TCU and the Fifth Ward. Just some ideas. I'd like to introduce the next panelist, Cary Darling, film critic, arts and culture editor for the Houston Chronicle. Again, what's your connection with the River Oaks Theater, and maybe a little bit about the significance to culture in Houston if a theater like this is not replaced?
Well, my connection is not quite as deep as everybody else, since I'm from Los Angeles originally, and I moved to Houston in 2017, right after Harvey. But I did come down to Houston for the first time in the 90s. And one of the things, most people come to Texas for the first time, they want to see barbecue or if the rodeo's going on. But on my to-do list was actually to see the River Oaks, to go to the River Oaks Theater, because I'd grown up going to, the Fox Venice and the New Art in LA and the Vista and those types of theaters there. So I had heard of River Oaks, so I definitely wanted to see it. And I saw The Killer, John Woo's The Killer, as I recall. So my connection to the River Oaks isn't quite as deep as everybody else's here, but I certainly was a fan of the theater. Then I said, if I lived in Houston, I would probably be going quite regularly. I didn't know back then that I'd actually be living in Houston at some point. So I've been obviously, many, many times since actually moving to Houston.
I'm curious, maybe also, what does it mean, having been a publicist for a while for the Rice Media Center and working with critics, like what does it mean to not have a physical art house, theater, or to lose one of the art house theaters for you as a critic?
Well, I always thought, like everybody else said, Houston's obviously a major city with lots of culture here. Even well before the pandemic, I always wondered why, Houston didn't have at least the same amount of facilities as Dallas does. Within 5 to 10 miles of downtown Dallas, you have two Alamo Draft Houses if you count the Lake Highlands one near White Rock Lake. You've got a Sinopolis, you've got the Texas Theater, you've got the Magnolia, you've got the Angelica, and you've got the Inwood. And then the AMC North Park, I guess, is a little bit outside that radius, but still you have 50 or 60 screens. And a lot of those are devoted to, independent film that's not Godzilla. And I never quite understood why Houston didn't quite have that same, but obviously what's here was quite good. River Oaks, the museums, 14 Pews, Aurora, so Rice Cinema, obviously. What was here was quite good, but I just thought there should be more of it. So it always struck me as kind of odd that a city of this size didn't have as much, as Dallas or, Chicago or some other places.
Yeah, and the River Oaks being run by Landmark is a commercial space too. It was a space still where a certain kind of international art house cinema could play that maybe the museum is focused more on a retrospective of a filmmaker's work. I'd like to introduce Minette Boesel, chair of the Houston Archeological Agricultural and Historical Commission. And I'm curious to know about the preservation and the advocacy right now that's going on to save the River Oaks Theater as a physical space. And if you have anyone that we should contact, how can you mobilize the people, or how can we be mobilized, those who are on the call tonight, to be a force for helping the River Oaks?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank everyone for inviting me. I am in with a group of such esteemed people here. Bunby, my daughter, is about to die because she can't believe that I'm actually on a panel with you. She just admires you. And Richard Linklater, I was in Austin just yesterday. We were lobbying for a historic preservation bill that's before the House, and we walked by your theaters and took pictures, and very proud of what you've achieved and accomplished there. And I'm sure there's many lessons that we can learn from your experience. My relationship to the theater is I live about a half a mile away and have for over 20 years. So this has always been a destination. I drive past it probably 4 or 5 times a day, and love the idea of being able to go in and socialize, have a glass of wine upstairs. I mean, what theater do you go to and have a glass of wine and actually carry that into the theater? And my mouth salivates. We're just walking in the lobby thinking about popcorn. So it's those experiences and movies and everything together that has been a great wonderful amenity for me living in this area. My role with the city is chair of the Houston Archeological and Historical Commission. We are a volunteer mayor and city council appointed body of a very diverse group of 13. And we monitor our historic preservation ordinance as it applies to 22 historic districts. Believe it or not, in Houston, we have 22 designated historic districts and about 500 individually designated landmarks and protected landmarks. So when things are changed on the exterior of these designated properties, beyond ordinary maintenance and repair, they do come before our body. And the goal is to maintain the character of each of these neighborhoods and the history, the ambiance, the sense of community, all of the things that you all are talking about. The River Oaks Theater is part of a designated landmark property for the entire shopping center. So anytime exterior changes are made, they do come before us. However, the type of designation it is really more letting us know what they're doing. Because of the way the ordinance was crafted a number of years ago, the designation allows, they apply to us, but then after 90 days or so, if they don't like the fact that we think that they should not change it or do something different, then they can go ahead and proceed with whatever they would like. Designating these properties can be done for city. We can elevate that designation, and we can also designate it for state landmark designation, as well as National Register of Historic Places. And that allows the opportunity for certain tax advantage to take place, which I can explain in a little more detail. But there are incentives out there for owners of these properties and long-term lessees to make this all possible. I would really like to answer your question, to commend Sarah Gish and Michelle and all the team that have, for the last month and a half or so, really rallied and generated so much interest, press, and attention. So much so, and so many emails were sent to the mayor's office that they have stepped in and tried to mediate the situation at hand. And I just really commend the public outcry for this theater and support for this theater. And that's what really helps, is mobilizing the public, expressing your sentiments, and making sure that those owners hear you loud and clear, and they have.
That's great. I'm sure it also doesn't hurt to contact your city council person and the mayor's office, maybe with a postcard, email, phone address, just to keep this on their radar. I also see the Join the Friends of the River Oaks Theater, Facebook page. I'm sure there's a lot of competing interest right now on the mayor, city council, and various offices' attention span because of COVID and because of the crisis all kind of American cities are in right now. So I'm curious if anyone on the panel has other ideas from Minette, from you, for successful, I don't want to call this a battle, but sure, successful battles to preserve sites like this. I'm seeing, I think, Rick.
Can I jump in and just say, in addition to writing it to the city, because it is an all hands on deck. Yes, the city of Houston can be, very instrumental in saving this, of course, but the owner, Weingarten's, they're a corporation. They're subject to public pressure and shame and all the things that, they have to, everyone's got their bottom line, but I'm sure they have an image they would like to, not tarnish, or you don't want to be hated. So a little corporate pressure is always good, So I really think they're going to be the key moving forward, because I don't know, they need to state their terms on what's possible so we can fill in the blanks around that. But a little transparency would be nice. I'm just coming into this. I'm like everybody else. I don't really, who knows the inner workings of that negotiation or what's going on there. But some transparency would be nice, to just know what's possible. But like I said earlier, where there's a will, there's a way. I think enough people to come together.
Richard, could you elaborate a little bit for us on your experience in Austin and the Austin Cinema Arts Group you started? Because you did it.
Yeah, well, we were kind of a nomadic film society. We had homes over the years, but I started that in 1985. So we're in our 36th year now. But we, several years ago, to become so expensive to show movies and other venues, we kind of needed to have our own, which, we're a bunch of film nerds, and we didn't really want to be in business like that. But at a point, we just kind of had to have a theatrical presence to be able to keep showing movies. So there was a shutdown movie theater that had been built in the late 80s, kind of in a mall that was little used, North Austin. And we just made a deal with them. It had been used for a little bit of movies, but it was kind of a general use space. And we just made a deal with them. And the owners of the mall were so happy to have us there as an anchor tenant. They made a very advantageous deal. We've got a long-term lease. I think that's another, before we pour a lot of money in the River Oaks, you have to know it's going to be there long-term. It can't be, save it, and then 3 years from now, when all the other leases run out, we meet the wrecking ball. It's like, no, you got to have a long-term commitment to get people to invest money. And I was able to look at people and say, hey, I'm in, we're all in this thing, we're 10 to 20 years here minimum, because we don't own the building. We just have a lease like everyone else. So, but if you have a long enough lease, you're able to raise money, to renovate and to fix up the theater and to make it a viable place. But beyond that, we book it independently, our own. I think that's the key. And that's also, in a way, it could be a blessing. If Landmark goes away and it's not part of any national chain, there's a security in that. But we just found out, it took one pandemic to tell us how vulnerable that is. All theaters, it's been it's been a wipeout. You can't pay the huge rents that are, if you don't have people, it's been a disaster. But you just, there's a way to make it work. It's a negotiation, it's all this stuff. So it can happen. But I think it could potentially, the next generation of the River Oaks could be even that much more of a community responsive theater. What Bunn described as that screening, that could become, that's even more popular. Local people, even easier to rent a place, have a party, just bring in performance elements to that big theater. You do what you have to do, to survive. But, there's a lot of possibilities, I think, and to make it even more local, dial it down to even more Houston, more local, more community. So I think that's the key. People have to feel like it's theirs, not some abstract entity. It's got to be, this is ours. Memberships, the key to our survival as a nonprofit, is, we have several thousand members who are with us, we can count on. That makes up that difference between staying in business and not, is that nonprofit is membership, and, that those dues you can count on. And, it's fun to give all the great things that go with membership. So I don't know. I just think a new entity, if in fact Landmark's gone, could flourish there and be good for the city. So that's my hope.
Bob, I see you are raising your hand.
Yeah, I was going to say also, I think the publicity that everybody there has generated hopefully can attract, some kind of benefactor too. Like I remember in Seattle, there was this amazing, one of the last Cinerama theaters, and literally there was there was people standing out in front of it with flyers saying they're going to actually put up a parking lot in this amazing, and this is true. They handed a flyer to Paul Allen as he was walking by, and he bought it and renovated it like an amazing theater. So just trying to get somebody to understand the cultural values, maybe a benefactor, a patron that can help, organize something to save it. And then like Rick said, I think the sort of nonprofit or subscription or film, in a way that kind of generates community support as well. and just the businesses around the theater too. Like the whole center is so important as a lead tenant to have traffic for all the other businesses, which was always the way theaters were, and I think it still is. Like
I see Bun, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I think the real issue here is about whether or not Weingarten Realty is even open to this right now, right? Like I'm almost certain that if you look around there, there's been some revitalization in that area for the past year now, right? And so I'm wondering if Weingarten already has like a potential renter for that space. I know for a fact, you know, being on the board for the Houston Cinema Arts Society, that there are individuals who are interested in putting together an effort to try to save the building. But I think we find ourselves in a situation that Rick alluded to, right? Is that we can do a temporary fix, but who's to say that Weingarten Realty isn't going to just sell that whole block, right? And then you find yourself in that same situation all over again. I will say this, I'm not sure how many people would know about this person, but there's a very well-regarded DJ here from Houston named DJ Screw. Passed away several years ago, had a record store, which was a musical landmark for many people. Many people would come from all over the world. I met some kids from Australia there before they shut it down, but the renter was adamant about taking the property and turning it into so the owner had a dental office, and it always talked about, you know, I need that space back because I need to expand my dental business. He turned off the water to them. You know, they had no plumbing facilities in the building. They still stayed on as long as possible. And then finally they were forced to move out. Well, they went to a new building and people still come, right? People still travel from around the world. People still come. But his structure was separate. I think that's the other thing about River Oaks, right? I think in these other instances, the structure itself wasn't necessarily connected as part of like this mini mall kind of thing. I know Richard said that theirs was in like a mall, but because it anchors, it's a different situation. And I mean, there are people honestly who would be willing to put together some kind of financial effort in order to keep it going. But I think the problem is that you just extend it, right? It's just you'd save it for a few months or maybe a year, and then you come back around and you have the same situation. I don't think they're going to sell it to somebody because they're going to want uniformity as far as the storefronts and appearances. So unless we can invite Paul Allen to Brasserie 19 across the street for lunch and kind of sell them on it, I mean, I don't know. I mean, but I'm not sure if you can even simply just purchase the theater. You know, I think that's the problem.
Yeah, we don't know. Again, they haven't said it's for sale, or they haven't really stated possible terms moving forward. So that's kind of frustrating. But, you know, Bob, I've been to that theater in Seattle. I was up there making a movie, and on a Sunday afternoon, I wandered into a 70mm print of Vertigo in that beautiful theater, and it was packed. I swear there were 600 people there. So these aren't just, you know, like symbolic gestures. Seattle worships that theater because it's locally owned, it's theirs, and it's special to them. So the River Oaks is that for Houston. And it's not a bad business, you know, it'd pay for itself, you know, like it's not necessarily a loser. It's just not a huge business. But like if it wasn't all nonprofit, it was free enterprise, I think you could get a bunch of people to buy it and see their money slowly trickle in over the years. And it's not a total giveaway. You know, it could work. It's viable. It's just the organization doing it. There's just a way. I know there's a way, you know, we just have to find out what's possible.
Cary had his hand raised next, and then I'll come back to you in a minute.
Yeah, I just want to say my colleague, Amber Elliott, had an email exchange with Weingarten today, and you know, they keep their plans pretty, you know, close to the vest, and they just said that there's no news to report in regards to the landmark lease. So I don't know if that means if they have somebody in mind or not. You know, I'm just kind of afraid what will happen is what happened with the Lincoln Theater in South Beach in Miami, which became an H&M, which I assume it still is an H&M. So I hope that, you know, doesn't happen with with the River Oaks.
And Minette?
Well, I was just going to say, I really feel enthusiastic about all of the work that this great extended community of filmmakers and aficionados have been working on in the last 6 weeks. I mean, it has given results. The mayor's office has gotten involved, and there's been conversations. We're not privy to all that, but I know they've been working on it in trying to communicate with Weingarten. And I think we need to be helpful. I think we need to keep our kind of core group going in regular meetings and working to talk to other groups that we can partner with. If you look at Match, which is in Midtown, which is one of the most successful small arts venues in the country, and they're overflowing with people that want to be in those spaces and in their venue for exhibits, for performances, film, you name it. So there's a demand for a facility like the River Oaks Theater with the 3 spaces that are there. And I just think we need to stay organized, keep the publicity going, work with the city, and reach out to some partners and talk to them about their plans for the future. What is your needs? And let's see about it. And then hopefully the city and others can help intercede with Weingarten. So I'd like to be optimistic.
Maybe some examples, from panelists to wherever that, again, of either public-private partnerships or unique models. I mean, in Chicago, I'm thinking of like the Music Box, which is a private company, but it's also a film distribution company. And it's also, it has the same problem that maybe River Oaks had too, because it's really hard to find parking in that neighborhood, but they're very engaged because they're independent and they're not owned by a chain. They're serving the local community through lots of interesting programming. And that's one thing maybe River Oaks, I think Rick alluded to this earlier, doesn't have going for it, in that it's often very centralized in its programming. It is not meeting local community needs. For example, partnering with other nonprofits to put on film festivals, or somebody mentioned, and this is maybe Michelle too, about Houston First, which is the city organization that sometimes the problem is, I think Houston First might get most of its money from occupancy, hotel occupancy, which of course there's been no hotel occupancy. Bob, you have your hand raised.
I was also going to say, it's, as a distributor now, going from when I came from the theaters, the River Oaks is really critical to all the distribution, independent distribution companies, because I think as you were saying earlier, like in Dallas, there's a lot of options, and other cities like in Houston, when we would book the River Oaks, we could be sure that the word of mouth would be there. You had a built-in audience, and it would extend the life of a movie, and let it play out, rather than at some of the bigger kind of mall theaters. If you put an independent film, if it doesn't work the first day, you're out. So the River Oaks allowed films to breathe, and as a distributor, there's not a lot of places to go. I mean, not putting down all the other, the alternatives there, but as far as like sort of commercial operations, the River Oaks was really special, and that's going to be it's going to be a problem. It'll reduce the number of important films that get to Houston, I think.
There was a question real quick from Swamp. I think maybe Minette can answer this, but if the theater becomes a historic landmark on a different designation level, will that prevent it, from literally physically being destroyed or transformed in a fundamental way? And is there any way that those who are on the call, again, can petition for the historical status of that building to be changed, either on the local, county, or state level, beyond what is already happening now in terms of activism?
That's a really good question. Thank you very much. In order to be what's called a protected landmark under our city ordinance, which provides the most protection, unfortunately, it does require the owner consent. So that would be, you can do it, petition if you like, but that is that makes it a little more challenging, obviously. The National Register of Historic Places, which takes a while to do, but it's offers really great tax incentives for commercial properties, and that can be initiated by a citizen to apply. I'll use the case of the Astrodome. There was an initiated application for National Register of Historic Places, which was achieved, and state landmark designation. If these all were achieved, the National Register provides about 20% investment tax credits for qualifying renovation costs. The state will provide 25%. So you could couple those together and you get 45% toward your qualifying costs. The city of Houston also has a city tax exemption program for historic landmarks, which this property is currently, if it were to be renovated. And then you could get a property tax exemption, city property tax exemption for up to 15 years, depending on the amount of funds that you put into the investment. But it could actually be over 100% of the reassessed value. So there are incentives out there that are available for someone, and they are available also in many cases for long-term lessees.
And I'm ignorant of this. I'm wondering, is there, and this was mentioned in a question, are there an open negotiation going on with Weingarten Realty? Who or what organization is the point person for those negotiations? And if it is Friends of the River Oaks, it was mentioned earlier that you can make a donation via the link that was posted through Swamp that could maybe financially support whatever sort of negotiation efforts, because these things might require a lawyer to be involved.
Or they might require a consultant of some kind. Really the mayor's office has been kind of the point person right now in terms of being an intermediary. And this is a private matter. This is not a public property, but they recognize the mayor because of the public coming to the mayor on so many levels, the mayor's office. They have interceded, and right now I think they've been communicating if there is communication.
I see, Cary, you have your hand raised.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to say that again, Landmark is interested in, if not the River Oaks, still being in Houston, obviously, since it is such a big market. I had chatted by email with Paul Surwitz today, the president of Landmark out in California, and he said, we are keenly interested in finding a new opportunity in Houston. We have been putting feelers out and sniffing around Houston for some time, and will continue to do so. So, I mean, it's sort of generic, but we'll see if they actually do something, maybe a new development somewhere like they did in Miami with Merrick Place, which is a big mall that they opened like an 8-plex there, a new Landmark facility a few years ago. Something like that might work in Houston.
Great, and I'm waiting for a question, maybe from Swamp, if you could pull out a question from the feed again. If anyone has any additional thoughts to help those who are involved with the Friends of River Oaks Theater to apply more pressure, get more attention, build a larger coalition. I just had one idea, which is like, get everyone's email addresses, please. Social media and algorithms stink. They're not a really good way right now, and the algorithms keep changing. But so please get email addresses and directly email people about any activities, because we don't want the whims of the algorithms to get the word out to people that might want to support. There's some comments on, I'm sorry, I was going to throw a question out. There's some comments on the Facebook feed. I saw some speculation as to how Landmark had not managed the theater well in the past several years, letting things get into repair, et cetera, and they didn't invest in the theater. Any comments from the panelists or hosts about Landmark's management of the theater?
River Oaks could use the spit shine. Let's put it like that. Whatever comes next, a nice little, mini renovation would be nice. All theaters have to do that, just to stay current. So, and that's accessibility to, you got to be super friendly. People love the historic nature of it. They'll meet you more than halfway, obviously. You got to help them a little bit. So I think what Minette was saying about all those tax incentives, all those credits, that's super important when it comes to a renovation of a historic building. I know Austin saved the Paramount Theater downtown. That was one of these things that was practically boarded up and came back in a huge way. And there's just no way Austin would ever lose that now. But it was kind of dicey, and the State Theater right next door to it. So, but it's things like that. It's these incentives. It's all that tax and grant. There's grant money. There's all that. That's what I've been saying this whole session. It's like where there's a will, there's a way. It takes some dynamic people, and clearly there's a lot of passion. You know, so people who specialize in that jump in, and you know, everyone's kind of in this mode. I know we all are. What can I do to help? Well, if you have if you're good with that, if you're a lawyer and you're good with that legal this or that, or you know, whatever, everybody, if you have something to offer, it's going to take a lot of people's best efforts to kind of get in there and make sense of it all and do that. But I want to say too, you know, Weingarten, I grew up going to their grocery store like everybody else. You know, Weingarten is a long time, many generations Houston name, you know. I just think they're going to be the key. They have a chance to be. It's one thing to have a business that's not paying their rent. You know, that's, everyone can understand that. That's a situation, a business situation. But the answer to that is where they'll define themselves. And that will be our attitude toward them from here on, will be how they handle this. And just everyone needs to make it really clear. They can't just do something rash that they wish they didn't 5 years from now, because you can't take it back, you know? So they just have to really, really know what they're up against, and everyone needs to let them know that. You know, corporations have to respond to the public, you know.
And to that end, I see in the chat that there was a post here that www.gishpicks.com is where you can go to sign up for an email listserv for Friends of River Oaks Theater. And it says people can sign up there by clicking on the purple button to add them to the adult list and choose the Friends of River Oaks Theater. So I'll be like the Jerry Lewis telethon, and I'll keep coming back to that as much as I possibly can. David, you have your hand raised.
Okay, I just want to make an observation, kind of jump in on what Rich was saying, because yes, they did a beautiful job of restoration with Paramount in Austin. And, you know, Texas has 4 major cities, and you can't help but kind of look at the other cities for comparison, right? Well, Austin managed to do a lovely job with the Paramount. In Dallas, they were able to save their Majestic. With us, we lost all of our Grand Palaces in the 70s. They were all gone. And San Antonio, they had 3 of them, and they've managed to save and restore all 3 of them. So it's, you know, we'd like to conserve ourselves to be on the same scale or better than the other Texas cities. So, you know, there's that actually adds to the emphasis in trying to save places like the River Oaks.
Just a quick thought, and I'll call on Cary. The idea of the River Oaks, maybe thinking of a new identity too. Somebody mentioned, you know, that the River Oaks sometimes were showing things that were shown at, you know, 7 or 8 to 10 other screens around town. The thing that's unique about the Paramount, or what I remembered what was unique about the Paramount, is its summer repertory film series screening, is its live music destination venue, is the fact that it's a multi-use space for other film festivals, Austin Gay and Lesbian Film Festival, other film festivals. So like reconceiving of that space again as what would serve multiple communities and make it a destination for multiple communities. Houston, from my memories, like people don't get out of their neighborhoods, you know, and they travel across town to go to a Home Depot, but sometimes they don't travel across town, you know, to go to specific destinations. But maybe by partnering for various nonprofits, it could be a more of a multi-use space. Cary.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I was hoping when Landmark got sold, I guess a couple of years ago, that they, you know, that the River Oaks would be at the top of their lists for sort of, restoration. And as Rick said, it needs a lot of TLC, like they did with the, well, this was before the new owners, but the Inwood up in Dallas was renovated a few years ago. And I'd like, in terms of programming, I think it's a great idea if they were a bit more independent, not showing, I love the movie The Father, but it's, it's playing on 20 screens in Houston. I would love to see them follow more of a model of like, the Texas Theater up in Dallas, who've done, I think, a really good job of programming independent cinema, but also getting people in seats as well.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like the Gene Siskel Film Center here in Chicago, which again is paired with the Art Institute, but has long running film festivals like the Black Harvest Film Festival, the oldest African-American cinema festival in the United States. I think some of those are done at the Museum of Fine Arts, but museums are other kinds of spaces. So maybe the Landmark could be a destination for festivals. I'm looking at questions here, but while I'm looking for another question, if somebody wants to jump in with a thought, please go ahead.
I was going to say these older theaters, the attraction is the architecture and everything, but you do have to have, like you were saying, it cleaned up a bit. Also, the technical side, the money you have to invest to make sure it's experienced, because at some point, if the older rundown theater, if it's not a good experience, like with, starts to wear. So there has to be investment, and it is tough. And I'm sure that maybe, there's a battle between, Landmark that, has gone through a tough year, but maybe no one invest. And then the landlord that probably wants just it gone and somebody paying more rent or to convert it. So it is a very tough thing. I think theatrical business is viable, but maybe this idea of, a nonprofit or getting somebody, but that's going to take time to work out. And I think there's not a lot of time. So it's really important that the pressure gets put on the landlord.
Yeah, it needs that rejuvenation has to happen, but we see it. The theaters that survive have that. There's kind of a death spiral. All those theaters that I grew up going to, the Windsor, all these great Houston houses we lost them all. That alone, Houston's got to save one of the last ones, if not the last one, I think. River Oaks is the oldest theater in Houston, right? There's no other survivors, I believe. So it's, got to avoid that death spiral, but where you can't put any more money into it because it's losing money. So it gets crappier and crappier. The experience gets worse and worse. And it's just, you lose an audience, and that you have to avoid that. And the way to do it is just a brand new, a reopening, a reemergence, a new theater, just something to get excited about for the community, to be everyone's partner. All the other organizations, all the schools, you got to, reach out to the community and see what you get back, but just be everyone's partner.
Somebody mentioned this in the chat, and I want to make sure to give a shout out to the GoFundMe that's supporting the River Oaks Theater staff. A lot of people are out of work in theaters throughout the United States. So it's www.gofundme.com/F/support the River Oaks Theater staff. I think if you just look under GoFundMe, support the River Oaks Theater staff. David.
Yeah, just in answer to one of the observations about the River Oaks being the longest, the oldest operational theater, and what would be the oldest if it was gone. Actually, the answer to that would be one in Sharpstown, which was built in the 90s. So there's a big gap between 1939 and the 90s.
Wow.
And there are a couple of older theaters that are being used for other purposes. There's one down in Market Square. And then there's one on Capitol Street that was a silent movie theater that was sort of rediscovered in a renovation, and it's rented out as a venue.
Yeah, it would be sad to lose, but the River Oaks, but somebody had mentioned at some point, like restoring, is there a theater called the Granada that's still physically in existence if something disastrous happens with Wine Garden. I don't know what runtime we're supposed to go to. I know at about an hour, Zoom fatigue sets in for me and for other viewers. But if there are some final thoughts that each of us would like to add, feel free to, yes, Bob.
I would just say one of my great memories is I can't even remember what year. It was a huge, rainstorm. Houston was the road started to fill up. We had to pull into the River Oaks Theater and hang out till I think 2 a.m. They let us stay open. And then the water receded. And I thought I could drive home. And I got in I think I had a 1972 Mercury Cougar, driving home from the River Oaks when a 10-foot wall of water came at me down the street, washed my Cougar into a 7-Eleven parking lot, and I got out and swam home. So I have these great memories of the River Oaks.
That's so Houston. That's such a Houston.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. So many great memories at the River Oaks. I could list so many. I could lecture for a full hour on great moments, but just a full cycle thing, because Bun mentioned it, and I'll mention my own personal story, is like having spent so much time there in the early 80s and throughout the 80s, but to be back there with my first film when it played in Houston, to be at the River Oaks, I got emotional. It's a unique experience. The theater that's nurtured you is showing your movie. It's really kind of profound, so I want as many people to have that experience as possible.
And that's where I'm at, Rick, right? Like it's a great place to really experience a really good film. You're not caught up with all the hustle and bustle of being like a big AMC 30 and all of that stuff, right? And you know that everyone that you see whenever you go to River Oaks is just like you, right? Has a sensitivity towards the arts, want to support independent filmmakers, right? And it would be terrible if the next Rick Linklater, had a film, wanted to bring it back home, and there was nowhere for him to bring it. Like, how bad is that, right? We always complain about guys that make it and then go show their films in LA and New York and Berlin and Venice and Sundance, right? And we never get the opportunity to have those people come back home. That's why every time, Rick is open to come to see us at the HCAS, we open our arms because we love to celebrate our local filmmakers. And I think it would be terrible if Houston, being the 4th largest city in the world, in 2021, the most diverse city in the world, and there's no place to showcase that diversity. There's no place to present local art in terms of cinema. And I mean, it would be a black eye on the city.
Cary?
Yeah.
Oh, I think you're muted, Cary.
Even if you are seeing a mainstream film like The Father at the River Oaks, the one great thing about seeing at the River Oaks is that you're not going to hear Godzilla in the next auditorium booming through, which often happens when you can go see something, at a big multiplex. So that's reason enough for me to want to keep the River Oaks as a movie theater.
There's a question from Michelle, and I don't know if anyone has the answer to this, but like pulling this all together, this is in crisis mode right now, but pulling this all together with a specific plan for those who have been involved with, maybe this is a Minette question, but with efforts to save historic buildings, but also creating arts organizations, surveying the Houston landscape, what are the organizations that could come together to create a plan for funding, management, membership, to reopen the River Oaks Theater under other auspices, and maybe Bun B and others, if you have ideas.
Well, I think that the consortium that's starting now is on the right path. And if we reach out to, say, Match or the Cinema Arts Festival and other organizations with like interests, women in film, some of the film festivals that are happening here, Museum of Fine Arts, we could put together a sort of collaborative group of people and to help navigate through this process, continue to work with the mayor's office. And I think it's important that each of you as panelists with your incredible knowledge base, if would agree to be kind of on call for advice and nurturing as we go, and maybe even a site visit at some critical point if we could maneuver that. It would really be helpful. But we just need to stay organized, focused, and pull in some collaborators.
We have a special quote from one of Houston's native son filmmakers that Michelle Mower would like to share screen. I'm going to read this in case for accessibility. One of the things in this world you genuinely and definitely cannot construct is an old building. Add to that the rarity of an actual existing and operation movie palace. This one has a history like literally no other left in Houston. I always liked the Weingarten's grocery stores, maybe not so much anymore. Wes Anderson. And somebody posted in the chat, you know, if you want to, the Weingarten headquarters is located at 2600 Citadel Plaza, Suite 125, Houston, Texas, 77008, 1-800-688-8865. You know, I'm sure they would love to hear from you directly about how much you love the River Oaks Theater and think something could be worked out to save what is a valuable historical piece, but cultural piece, but also an attraction, I'm sure, that could make continue to make them money, leads to the right organization. And I think the share screen has stopped. That was our special guest star quote.
Thank you, Wes. Yeah, we corresponded a few days ago, or in the last week. And yeah, he was like, Weingarten's, that's where everything on our dinner table came from. I said, I know, me too. It's the same, but you know, grocery stores kind of are in the real estate business, but what they are, grocery stores, they're community based. So let's hope they never forget the core of their whole corporation was the Houston community. So it needs them right now to be not just profit. You know, there's more things than money in this world. Obviously, we're all in the arts. It's about our souls. It's about our, you know, shared culture. It's about, you know, community. So there's a lot of different things about, you know, in the world than just quarterly statements. Like, come on, man.
And there was a question piggybacking on that, maybe to Bun B and to others. You know, Houston is one of the most diverse cities in the United States. Repeatedly, what is a way that space can be more inviting, more inclusive to diverse communities, audiences, and what maybe organizations in town that have not been thought of could be brought into the conversation at this point to amplify and to really make this space a multi-use space. Any ideas?
Well, I mean, you could always use the theater as an extension of any cultural festivals in town, whether it be Asian festivals or, you know, any kind of, whether it's a Juneteenth, any type of these cultural festivals that take place in the city. There's always some kind of film component to it, right? That's the beauty of film, is that its ability to tell so many stories about so many groups of people, right? And so it could always be an extension of that. You know, you could use it for a monthly, you know, take one of the rooms and use it for a monthly meet and greet of artists, of cinephiles, right? And, you know, maybe start like a movie club there, right? Where every month, you know, film creators, writers, you know, videographers could all, you know, join up, come in, we'll watch a movie, right? We'll study it. You know, look at everything from the technical aspects, the writing, the production, design of everything, costuming, right? Because people that want to do all of those things exist right here in Houston, right? And so that's just a way of using the space, again, for its intention, which is to bring people together, like-minded individuals together. But I mean, it's all wishful thinking if Weingarten doesn't pick up the phone. I personally feel like everybody that was in front of River Oaks with a sign needs to be standing in front of Weingarten Realty, right, with a sign and giving them a little pressure there. At least something to make someone come out and make a statement, right? Because there's no, right now, as far as I can see, there is no active negotiation with anyone and Landmark or Weingarten Realty, right? So I think they're pretty much just trying to wait this out, you know?
Well, that's usually a good business strategy. Let them make their noise. They'll all go back to their lives, and then we'll do what we're going to do. We just got to wait it out. You just have to let them know this isn't going away. This won't be forgotten. You know, this isn't going away. So they'll listen. You know, it's kind of, it's politics, but it's real. You know, so.
Cary, I think you're muted.
Just to sort of piggyback on what Bun was saying, now with AMC Studio 30 gone, which was a major showcase for South Asian films and films from Korea and China and Hong Kong, that could be one element that whoever takes over the River Oaks could, because there's obviously a huge audience there in Houston for that market. I think that would be great as a fan of, you know, Korean and Asian films. And secondly is, I wasn't here when the whole thing went down with the Alabama theater and the protests against that. And obviously that wasn't successful with Weingarten. What can we learn from what went on in those negotiations or those protests that we don't, you know, the same mistakes aren't made this time?
Somebody put in the chat, you know, does anyone know Beyonce? You know, and I think if you're looking for high profile Houstonians, maybe having somebody
I know her,
involved.
but I don't know if she's a cinephile. That'd be
Yeah.
Solange, maybe. Solange would definitely be a cinephile.
Yeah.
Right. She's a director now. She just released Criterion Collection of her short film that accompanied her last album. That's actually, might not hurt to reach out to someone like that who's pretty high profile, you know.
I do know Beyonce, you know, was a fan enough of Julie Dash's Daughters of the Dusk, which would be certainly a kind of film that played at the River Oaks Theater in terms of all the Lemonade videos and the references to that amazing film. So maybe that is one angle. And David.
Yeah, and you know, in regards to the Alabama, there was an outcry when it closed down. And actually what's fascinating is that after it closed, they turned into a bookstore for quite a number of years. And they did a beautiful full restoration of the theater. In a way, it was appreciated more for being a movie theater then as a bookstore than it was prior to that as a theater. So there's kind of an irony there. Sadly, it's not as much care was taken when it became a Trader Joe's, and they desecrated it to a certain degree. But during the bookstop years, it was beautiful inside. And a lot of people would just hang out there and appreciate the architecture for what it was. So, you know, it's not just the venue still remaining a place to watch movies. There's the whole architectural part to it as well. And keeping that intact, regardless of it's being used for its original purpose.
Somebody did put in the chat, though, that Weingarten added to the lease of the Alabama that no one could ever show films there again. So I think, you know, saving the space for other architectural uses are of interest, but it would be interesting if films can keep showing there. I just want to make sure, again, give a shout out to Friends of River Oaks Theater. If you're interested and you want to stay involved, definitely sign up for the Facebook group, sign up with the email listserv so that you're getting direct emails. And there was a plug here too, that more panels like this, perhaps organized with other organizations too, like the MFAH, the Houston Film Commission, and others, to keep building a movement here. Because as Rick said, it's politics, and you're going to have to be consistent, persistent, and in it for the long run, because they will just wait you out, as is what happened with an effort to save the Texas Union Theater and the University of Texas campus happened in the late 90s. There were many plans made. There were many groups involved. Rick came and spoke at protests.
Kyle made a film about it.
I made a film
University
about
Inc.
it. We attempted
Young man film. That was great.
We shamed them on cable television with a spot on the Independent Film Channel on John Pearson's split screen show. That didn't do it. That didn't do any good. You know, that they just waited. So you're going to have to amplify it much further on some level.
Yeah.
Possibly.
That's pretty scary about the Alabama, the fact that they would put that in the lease, that it couldn't ever come back. Because I remember that. I remember going into Bookstop or whatever, and the screen was still there behind all the books. You know, it was still a beautiful theater. And the irony, cinema was supposed to knock out literature back in the early 20th century. Like, oh, no one will read anymore. They'll just go to movies. And I saw that ironically as, oh, literature is making a comeback. It's another move here. But I remember thinking all that in the 80s. But that's a little scary that they would not even entertain the fact that it could ever become a theater again, because that was a great theater. You know, I'm doing a film right now that's set in Houston in the late 60s when we were walking on the moon. But I have a scene where the family walks into a movie at the Alabama Theater. I'll just say that was one more special theater that we cannot let the River Oaks go that way. You know, so.
Would anyone else like a last word here as we wrap things up?
Is that place by the theater, Mark Fraley's, is that still open? Does anybody know? There was like a...
I believe so.
Yeah, I remember that. But yeah, it was kind of, I mean, that was another adjunct to it. But
dangerous place.
Yeah. Remember all these, there have been several examples of like the Paul Allen example. I think we should talk to Beyonce, but also just some way to find to make this happen. You can't let it go. And I think the pressure on the if you think about, even when I was at Amazon, when I first got there, they were thinking about theaters, just like they went back into bookstores, but they never did it. But there was a lot of talk about it. And like I said, Netflix has restored the Egyptian. So may we call Netflix too.
Somebody threw in a quote here, artist from Dominic Demonel, artists are economically useless and yet they are indispensable. Do we know other heirs to major fortunes like the Demonels who are currently looking, instead of buying up art at the next Biennale, are interested in preserving this space and making a deal with Weingarten that they can't refuse? Maybe that's another angle.
Well, can I just say, instead of waiting for one angel, maybe Houston has 25 angels who can get together for the community. That's more reasonable. If film isn't your life and your passion, and you don't have an extra 40 billion the way Paul Allen did back in the day, but Houston, there's a lot, as we know, there's a lot of money floating around. There's a lot of foundations. There's a lot of, so it's the same people who support the other big institutions of Houston. And they're currently supporting, Cinema Arts Festival, the museum, just add one more investment in Houston's cultural history and life of the citizens. And, 100,000 here, 100,000 there, who knows? Enough people do that, it could happen. Let's do it.
Well, I want to thank all of the panelists this evening for coming on and giving of their valuable time, for Swamp, for Michelle, for Friends of the River Oaks Theater. And the chat has a lot of great ideas we could not get around to. So I hope somebody copies the chat and uses it as a guide for future activation. But I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight, and say good luck from wherever we are currently at to you all there fighting on the ground.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. It's great seeing all you guys.
Good to see everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, and keep the momentum going. We'll keep it going.
Thank you.
Keep the fight going, guys.
Don't let up, man. Don't let up. It's got to mean something to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.